The words hit me like shrapnel to the chest. "You're worthless, Dad. Look at yourself. You're nothing but a broken old man who can't even hold down a real job." My 17-year-old son Marcus stood in our cramped kitchen, his face twisted with rage and embarrassment, pointing an accusing finger at my work uniform. The name tag read, "Frank Mitchell, security guard." And in that moment, I saw myself through his eyes. A failure, a disappointment, a man who had peaked in high school and spent the rest of his life falling short. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Marcus didn't know was that the medals hidden in my closet told a very different story, a story that would change everything between us forever. Have you ever had someone you love look at you with complete contempt? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the people we're trying to protect the most are the ones who judge us the harshest. My name is Frank Mitchell, and at 52 years old, I learned that sometimes keeping the truth buried comes with a price higher than I ever imagined. The argument started over something trivial, as they always did. Marcus wanted money for a new gaming headset, something that cost more than I made in 3 days of pulling 12-hour shifts at the Riverside Shopping Center. I had gently explained that money was tight this month, that we needed to prioritize groceries and the electric bill. But Marcus saw it differently. He saw it as another example of his old man's inability to provide, another reminder that his friends' fathers drove luxury cars while his dad rode the bus to work. Our small apartment in downtown Portland felt even smaller when Marcus unleashed his fury. The thin walls seemed to absorb his anger and reflect it back at both of us. "Tyler's dad just bought him a car for his birthday," he shouted, pacing back and forth in our tiny living room. "A brand new Honda Civic, and you can't even afford to buy me a headset that costs $200? I tried to remain calm, sitting on our second-hand couch that I had bought from a thrift store 5 years earlier. "Marcus, son, I know it's frustrating, but we have to be realistic about our situation. I'm doing the best I can." That's when he exploded. The words poured out of him like water from a broken dam. Years of accumulated resentment and embarrassment spilled across our living room floor. "Your best? Your best is working as a security guard in a mall. Your best is riding the bus because you can't afford a car. Your best is living in this tiny apartment while my friends' parents drive luxury cars with houses with swimming pools." Each word was carefully chosen to wound, and they found their target with surgical precision. But it was what came next that nearly broke me. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face me directly. His young face contorted with a mixture of anger and shame. "Do you know what it's like having to tell people what my dad does for work? Do you know how embarrassing it is when they ask where you went to college and I have to say you never went? You're worthless, Dad. You're nothing." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood there breathing heavily, as if his outburst had physically exhausted him. I sat motionless on the couch, feeling like I had just taken a beating from an expert fighter. In that moment, looking at my son's face, I saw not just anger, but genuine disappointment. He was ashamed of me, ashamed to be my son. What Marcus didn't understand was that every choice I had made, every sacrifice, every quiet moment of swallowing my pride had been for him. The truth about who I really was, about what I had done and seen in places he couldn't pronounce, lived locked away in a metal box in my bedroom closet. It had been there for 18 years, collecting dust, while I built a life designed to keep him safe from the shadows that followed me home from Afghanistan. I had never told Marcus about the nightmares that still woke me up at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat and reaching for weapons that weren't there. I had never explained why I sometimes flinched when cars backfired or crowds made me nervous. I had never shared the real reason I preferred the quiet solitude of a security guard's booth to the chaos of a corporate office. Some truths, I believed, were too heavy for a child to carry. But as I watched my son storm out of our apartment,
slamming the door so hard that our neighbor's dog started barking. I began to wonder if my silence had created a different kind of burden. Marcus saw me as weak because he had never seen me strong. He saw me as a failure because he had never learned about my successes. He saw me as worthless because I had hidden away everything that proved my worth. The next morning brought a cold October rain that seemed to match my mood perfectly. I sat in my security booth at the Riverside Shopping Center, watching early morning shoppers hurry past with their umbrellas and coffee cups, their lives seemingly so much more purposeful than mine. My security supervisor, Janet Kowalski, stopped by around 10 o'clock with her usual friendly smile and steaming cup of coffee. "Morning, Frank. You look like you got hit by a truck. Everything okay at home?" Janet was one of the few people at work who treated me like more than just a uniform filling a chair. She was a former nurse who had taken the security supervisor job after her husband died, needing something with flexible hours while she cared for her elderly mother. She had a way of seeing through people's facades that came from years of dealing with patients who couldn't always tell her what was wrong. "Just teenage problems," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Marcus is going through a phase where everything I do embarrasses him." Janet nodded knowingly. "My daughter went through the same thing when she was his age. She used to tell people I was a doctor instead of a nurse, like being a nurse wasn't good enough. Kids that age, they don't understand that success isn't always measured in dollar signs." Her words hit closer to home than she could have known. After she left, I found myself thinking about success and how it gets measured.
In the Army, success was measured in missions completed, lives saved, objectives secured. In the civilian world, it seemed to be measured only in salary figures and job titles. Somewhere in the translation from soldier to civilian, I had lost the vocabulary to explain my own worth. That evening, I came home to find Marcus already in his room with the door closed. This had become our routine over the past few months. He would disappear into his digital world of video games and social media, emerging only for meals and school. Our conversations had become limited to practical matters, homework deadlines, chore reminders, and permission requests. The easy relationship we had enjoyed when he was younger felt like a distant memory. I knocked softly on his door. "Marcus, I brought home pizza." "Not hungry," came the muffled reply. I stood outside his door for a moment, listening to the sounds of his video game through the thin wood. The rapid-fire gunshots and explosions felt ironically familiar, though I doubted the designers had captured the metallic taste of fear that came with real combat, or the way your hands shake for hours afterward. Instead of pushing the conversation, I ate dinner alone at our small kitchen table, looking out at the Portland skyline through our apartment window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, each one representing someone else's life, someone else's story. I wondered how many of those lights belonged to fathers who felt like failures, men who had somehow lost the ability to communicate with their own children. Later that night, after Marcus had finally gone to bed, I found myself standing in front of my bedroom closet. The metal box sat on the top shelf, exactly where I had placed it when we moved into this apartment 5 years ago. It was a simple gray security box, the kind you might use for important documents or small valuables. To anyone else, it would look completely unremarkable. But inside that box lay the evidence of a different Frank Mitchell, a man my son had never met. I pulled the box down and set it on my bed, running my fingers over its scratched surface. The combination lock still worked perfectly, and as I opened it, the familiar smell of metal and aged paper filled my room. Inside, carefully arranged and preserved, were the pieces of my military service that I had kept hidden from civilian eyes. The Purple Heart sat in its original presentation case, the ribbon still vibrant after all these years. Beside it lay the Bronze Star with V for Valor, earned during a firefight outside Kandahar when I had carried 2 wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire. There was the Combat Infantry Badge, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal, and the Army Commendation Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster.
Each piece of metal represented moments of courage, sacrifice, and brotherhood that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. But it was the photographs that really told the story. Pictures of me in full combat gear, 20 pounds lighter and 15 years younger, standing with my unit in the mountains of Afghanistan. Images of the school we had helped build in a small village outside Kabul, surrounded by children whose smiles transcended language barriers. A photo of me receiving the Bronze Star from our commanding officer, my face serious and proud in a way that seemed foreign to the man who now checked shopping bags and monitored security cameras. At the bottom of the box lay a stack of letters and commendations from superior officers, fellow soldiers, and even some from Afghan interpreters who had worked with our unit. One letter, written by Captain Rodriguez, after I had saved his life during an IED attack, described me as the finest soldier I have ever had the privilege to serve alongside, and a man whose courage under fire exemplifies the very best of the American military. I picked up the Bronze Star and held it in my palm, feeling its weight. Such a small piece of metal to represent such a significant moment in my life. I could still remember every detail of that day. The sound of the RPG whistling overhead, the acrid smell of smoke and burning fuel, the weight of Sergeant Collins on my back as I carried him through 200 yards of open ground while Taliban fighters tried to cut us down. Marcus had no idea that his worthless father had once been trusted with the lives of 32 soldiers. He didn't know that I had led patrols through some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan, or that men who were braver and stronger than I would ever be had once looked to me for leadership and guidance. He couldn't understand that the same man who now checked receipts at a mall exit had once coordinated airstrikes and medical evacuations in the middle of active combat zones. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son played video games where he controlled digital soldiers, commanding them through virtual battles and earning achievement points for simulated heroics. Meanwhile, his real father, who had lived through actual combat and earned real medals for genuine courage, sat in the next room being dismissed as a failure because he didn't drive a luxury car or wear an expensive suit to work. But the deeper truth was more complicated than Marcus could understand at 17. The transition from military to civilian life had been harder than any battle I had fought overseas. The skills that made me valuable as a soldier didn't translate easily to corporate boardrooms or sales meetings. The leadership abilities that had kept my unit alive in Afghanistan didn't help much when applying for management positions at companies that valued college degrees over combat experience. The nightmares and hypervigilance that came with PTSD made certain career paths impossible. I couldn't handle high-stress environments or jobs that required extensive travel. Crowded offices made me nervous, and sudden loud noises could trigger flashbacks that left me disoriented and shaking. The security guard at the mall was perfect for me not because I lacked ambition, but because it allowed me to use my military skills in an environment I could control. I had chosen this life deliberately, prioritizing my mental health and my ability to be present for Marcus over salary and status. But how could I explain that to a teenager who measured success in terms of brand names and bank accounts? How could I help him understand that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is choose a quiet life over a prestigious one? The next few days passed in a cold détente between Marcus and I. We spoke only when necessary, our conversations limited to logistics and scheduling. He left for school each morning without saying goodbye, and I left for work each afternoon with a heavy heart. The tension in our small apartment was thick enough to cut with a knife. It was during this silent standoff that fate decided to intervene in the most unexpected way. Marcus had been struggling with a history project about the war in Afghanistan, a 20-page research paper that was worth a significant portion of his grade. He had procrastinated on the assignment, as teenagers often do, and now found himself with only 3 days to complete what should have been a month-long project. I overheard him on the phone with his friend Derek, panic evident in his voice. I'm so screwed, man. I need to find primary sources, like interviews with actual veterans or something. And I don't know any veterans. Mrs. Patterson says Wikipedia doesn't count, and all the books in the library are like 1,000 pages long. The irony was almost painful. My son needed to interview a veteran for his school project, and he was sitting in the same apartment as someone who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. But our relationship had deteriorated to the point where he would rather fail the assignment than ask me for help. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything between us. I knocked on Marcus's door, something I had been doing more tentatively in recent weeks. When he opened it, I could see the stress and exhaustion on his young face. His room was cluttered with textbooks and notebooks, clear evidence that he had been struggling with more than just the history project.
Marcus, I heard you talking to Derek about your Afghanistan paper. I might be able to help you with that. He looked at me skeptically. Dad, I need to interview actual veterans, people who are actually there. This isn't something you can help me with unless you know someone who's served. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to step off a cliff. Son, I think we need to talk. There are some things about me, about my past that you don't know. Things I probably should have told you a long time ago. Marcus raised an eyebrow, probably expecting another lecture about hard work and responsibility. What are you talking about? Instead of answering immediately, I walked to my bedroom and retrieved the metal box from my closet. Marcus followed me, curiosity overcoming his recent hostility. I set the box on our kitchen table and slowly opened it, revealing the contents that I had kept hidden for so many years. The change in Marcus's expression was immediate and dramatic. His eyes widened as he took in the medals, the photographs, and the official documents. He picked up one of the combat photos, staring at the younger version of me in full military gear, and then looked back at the man standing in front of him, as if seeing me for the first time. Dad? Is this really you? I nodded, my throat suddenly tight with emotion. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan, between 2002 and 2008. I was a staff sergeant with the 82nd Airborne Division. These medals, these pictures, this is all from my time over there. Marcus picked up the Purple Heart with trembling hands. You were wounded? IED blast outside Kandahar in 2006. Shrapnel in my left leg and a concussion that kept me in the field hospital for 2 weeks. But I went back to my unit as soon as the doctors cleared me. He set down the Purple Heart and picked up the Bronze Star, reading the inscription on the back. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States while serving with the 82nd Airborne Division in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Mitchell distinguished himself by exceptionally valorous conduct during combat operations. Marcus looked up at me, his face pale with shock. Dad, why didn't you ever tell me about this? Why have you been hiding this from me? The question I had been dreading for years had finally arrived, and I found myself struggling to find the right words. How do you explain to your child that you had kept the most significant part of your identity secret because you thought it would protect them? How do you describe the weight of carrying memories that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy? Marcus, when you came along, I wanted to give you a normal life, a peaceful life. I didn't want you to grow up in the shadow of war stories and combat trauma. I thought if I could just be a regular dad, working a regular job, you could have the kind of childhood I never had. Marcus shook his head slowly, still staring at the medals. But Dad, this is incredible. You're a war hero. You saved people's lives. You fought for our country. Why would you want to hide that? I sat down across from him at the kitchen table, feeling the weight of 18 years of silence pressing down on me. Son, there are things about war, about combat, that change a person forever. I've seen things and done things that I wouldn't want to burden you with. I thought if I could keep that part of my life separate, you could grow up without carrying any of that darkness.
Marcus picked up one of the photographs showing me with my unit, all of us young and confident in our desert camouflage uniforms. Who are these guys? My squad. The best men I ever served with. I pointed to different faces in the photo. That's Sergeant Martinez, our medic. Private Johnson, youngest guy in the unit but tough as nails. Corporal Davis, our demolitions expert. Staff Sergeant Williams, my best friend over there. Where are they now? The question hit me like a physical blow. I had been dreading this moment, but I knew it was time for complete honesty. Martinez runs a construction company in Texas now. Johnson became a police officer in his hometown in Ohio. Davis struggled with PTSD for a while, but he's doing better now. Works as a counselor for other veterans. Marcus noticed that I hadn't mentioned Williams. What about Staff Sergeant Williams? I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of survivor's guilt settling over me. Williams didn't make it home, son. He was killed by a suicide bomber in Kabul 3 weeks before our tour ended. He had a wife and 2 little girls back in North Carolina. The silence that followed was different from the angry silence that had filled our apartment for the past week. This was the quiet that comes when someone realizes that the world is more complicated and painful than they previously understood. Marcus set down the photograph carefully, as if it were made of glass. Dad, I'm so sorry.
I had no idea. There's no way you could have known, Marcus. I made sure of that. I reached across the table and picked up a letter from the bottom of the box. This is a letter from Williams's wife, Sarah. She wrote to me after the funeral, thanking me for being her husband's friend. She said he used to write to her about our conversations, about how I helped him deal with being away from his family. Marcus took the letter and read it silently, his young face growing more serious with each line. When he finished, he looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes for months. Respect. Dad, I don't understand. If you did all this, if you're this person, why are you working as a security guard? Why aren't you doing something, I don't know, more important? It was a fair question, and one I had asked myself many times over the years. Marcus, when I came back from my last tour, I was dealing with some issues. PTSD, they call it, post-traumatic stress disorder. It made it hard for me to function in certain environments. Loud noises, crowds, high-pressure situations. They all triggered flashbacks and panic attacks. I paused, watching his face carefully for any sign of fear or judgment. When I saw only concern and attention, I continued. The security job at the mall might not seem like much to you, but it's perfect for me. It uses my military training in a way that doesn't trigger my PTSD. I can help keep people safe, which is what I've always done, but in an environment where I can manage my symptoms. Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand. So you chose that job on purpose. It wasn't because you couldn't do anything else. Exactly. And I chose this quiet life because I wanted to be fully present for you. I didn't want my war experiences to affect your childhood. I wanted you to see me as just your dad, not as someone carrying the weight of combat trauma. Marcus looked around at the medals and photographs spread across our kitchen table, then back at me. But Dad, hiding all this from you, it made me think you were weak. It made me ashamed of you. If I had known who you really were, who you are, I would never have said those things to you. The pain in his voice was evident, and I could see that he was struggling with guilt over his recent behavior. I reached across the table and put my hand on his shoulder. Marcus, you're 17 years old. You're supposed to push against your parents, to question authority, to figure out your own path in the world. I don't blame you for anything you said. You were reacting to what you could see, and I had made sure you couldn't see the whole picture. But I called you worthless, Dad. I said you were nothing. How can you not be angry about that? I picked up the Bronze Star
and turned it over in my hands, remembering the day I had earned it. Son, I've been called much worse things by much scarier people than my teenage son having a bad day. The Taliban fighters who were shooting at me in Afghanistan had some very creative insults. Compared to that, being called worthless by someone I love just means you're frustrated, and you don't have all the information you need to make a fair judgment. Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks, a small but genuine expression of relief. So you're not mad at me? I'm not mad at you, Marcus. I'm proud of you for caring enough about your education to be stressed about this project. I'm proud of you for having high standards, even if those standards made you disappointed in what you thought I was. And I'm proud of you for being mature enough to handle this conversation. Marcus picked up another photograph, this one showing me in dress uniform receiving the Bronze Star. Dad, can I ask you about what you did to earn this medal? For my project, I mean, but also because I want to understand. I took a deep breath, preparing to share a story I had never told anyone outside of my unit. It was during a patrol outside Kandahar. We were escorting a convoy of supplies to a forward operating base when our lead vehicle hit an IED. The explosion was massive, flipped the Humvee completely over, and trapped 3 soldiers inside. Marcus leaned forward, completely absorbed in the story. What did you do? The vehicle was on fire, and we could hear the trapped soldiers calling for help. But the area wasn't secure. We were taking sniper fire from a nearby ridge, and there was a real possibility of secondary IEDs planted around the blast site. The logical thing to do was call for air support and wait for the area to be cleared. But you didn't wait. I couldn't wait. Those were my soldiers in that burning Humvee. Sergeant Collins, Private Anderson, and Corporal Thompson. Thompson was just 19 years old, had a baby daughter back home he had never met. I could hear them screaming, and I knew they didn't have time for air support. I paused, remembering the weight of that decision, and the fear that had nearly paralyzed me. I told the rest of my squad to provide covering fire, and I ran to the overturned Humvee. The door was jammed, so I had to use a crowbar to pry it open while bullets were hitting the ground around me. I pulled Collins out first. He was unconscious and had a broken leg. Then Anderson, who was bleeding badly from a head wound.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus's eyes were wide with a mixture of admiration and horror. What about Thompson? Thompson was trapped under the dashboard, and the fire was getting worse. I could see the flames starting to reach the fuel tank, and I knew we had maybe 30 seconds before the whole thing exploded. I managed to pull him free, but by then my uniform was smoking from the heat, and the sniper fire was getting more accurate. How did you get them all to safety? I carried Collins first, got him to a safe position about 50 yards away where our medic could work on him. Then I went back for Anderson, then Thompson. 3 trips through enemy fire while that vehicle burned. On the last trip, the Humvee exploded just as I reached our defensive position with Thompson. Marcus sat back in his chair, clearly trying to process the magnitude of what I had just described. Dad, you saved 3 people's lives while people were shooting at you. That's not just brave, that's like superhero brave. I shook my head. Marcus, I was terrified the entire time. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the crowbar. I was sure I was going to die, and I was thinking about you and how I might never see you again. But sometimes being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified. Is that why you don't like loud noises? Because of explosions like that? Partly, yes. When you've been in situations where sudden loud noises meant life or death, your brain doesn't forget that. Even now, 18 years later, when a car backfires or construction equipment makes a sudden noise,
My body reacts like I'm back in Afghanistan. It's one of the ways PTSD affects people. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Dad, can I interview you for my project? I mean, really interview you, with all the details about your service and what it was like over there. Of course, son. I'll tell you anything you want to know. But I have one condition. What's that? I want you to understand that war isn't glorious, Marcus. It's not like the video games you play or the movies you watch. It's ugly and complicated, and it changes people in ways that never fully heal. If I'm going to share these stories with you, I need you to understand that real combat isn't entertainment. It's something that affects real people in real ways for the rest of their lives. Marcus's expression grew serious again. I understand, Dad. I promise I won't treat it like it's some kind of game or adventure story. Over the next 3 days, Marcus and I spent hours talking about my military service in a way we had never talked about anything before. I shared stories about the friendships I had formed with my fellow soldiers, the pride I had felt in serving my country, and the satisfaction that came from helping to build schools and medical clinics in Afghan villages. But I also told him about the darker aspects of war, the constant fear and stress of combat operations, the moral complexity of fighting in a foreign country where it was often impossible to distinguish between enemies and civilians, the grief of losing friends, and the guilt of surviving when others didn't. Marcus listened to everything with a maturity that surprised me. He asked thoughtful questions about the ethical challenges of warfare, the impact of PTSD on veterans and their families, and the difficulties of transitioning from military to civilian life. For the first time since he had become a teenager, I felt like I was talking to my son as one adult to another. The transformation in our relationship was remarkable. Where there had been contempt, there was now respect. Where there had been embarrassment, there was now pride. Marcus began telling his friends about his father's military service, and I could hear the admiration in his voice when he mentioned my medals or shared stories from my deployment. But the most significant change was in how Marcus saw the world around him. His history project became much more than just an assignment to complete for a grade. It became a genuine exploration of the human cost of war and the sacrifices made by military families. He interviewed other veterans he found through local VFW chapters, researching not just the political and strategic aspects of the Afghanistan conflict, but the personal stories of the people who had served there. When Marcus presented his project to his class, he began with a personal story about his father that brought several of his classmates to tears. He talked about growing up not knowing about my military service, about the shame he had felt over what he perceived as my lack of ambition, and about the profound shift in perspective that came from discovering the truth. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called me after the presentation to tell me how moved she had been by Marcus's project and how proud I should be of both my service and my son's growth as a person. She mentioned that several other students in the class had been inspired to research their own family histories and had discovered military service among their relatives that they had never known about. The ripple effects of our conversation extended far beyond Marcus's history grade. Our entire relationship changed as we began to communicate with a level of honesty and openness that we had never achieved before. Marcus started asking me about other aspects of my life, my thoughts on current events, my experiences growing up, and my hopes for his future. I found myself sharing stories and perspectives that I had kept to myself for years, not just about my military service, but about my values, my fears, and my dreams for him. In return, Marcus began opening up to me about his own struggles with school, friendships, and the pressure he felt to succeed in ways that would make me proud. One evening, about a week after his project presentation, Marcus came to me with a confession that revealed just how much our relationship had changed. Dad, I need to tell you something. I've been lying to you about where I go after school sometimes. My heart immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios involving drugs, alcohol, or trouble with the law. What do you mean, Marcus? I've been going to the library to research colleges and scholarships, but I told you I was hanging out with friends because I was embarrassed about not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. All my friends seemed to have these clear plans about their futures, and I felt stupid for being confused. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but more important was the trust Marcus was showing by telling me the truth. Son, there's nothing embarrassing about being uncertain about your future at 17. Most people your age are confused about what they want to do, they just don't admit it.
But Dad, now that I know about your military service, I feel like I have something to live up to. You did these incredible things. You served your country. You saved people's lives. How am I supposed to follow that? It was a question that cut to the heart of one of my deepest fears about sharing my military history with Marcus. I had worried that he would feel pressured to join the military himself, or that he would feel inadequate compared to my combat experience. I sat down next to him on the couch, choosing my words carefully. Marcus, I need you to understand something very important. I'm not proud of you because I want you to be like me. I'm proud of you because I want you to be the best version of yourself. My military service is part of my story, but it doesn't have to be part of yours. Marcus looked at me questioningly. But don't you want me to serve, to follow in your footsteps? Son, I want you to find a path in life that makes you happy and allows you to contribute something positive to the world. If that path includes military service, I'll support you completely. But if it doesn't, I'll be just as proud of you. The courage and integrity that make someone a good soldier are the same qualities that make someone a good teacher, a good doctor, a good father, or a good person in any profession. So, you won't be disappointed if I don't join the Army? I put my arm around him, feeling grateful for the opportunity to clear up this misconception before it could take root. Marcus, I will be disappointed if you don't follow your own dreams and live your own life. The whole point of my service, the whole point of why I fought in Afghanistan, was to protect the freedom that allows you to choose your own path. If I pressured you to make the same choices I made, I would be wasting everything I fought for. This conversation seemed to lift a weight from Marcus's shoulders that I hadn't even realized he was carrying. Over the following weeks, he began exploring different college programs and career possibilities with renewed enthusiasm. He researched everything from engineering to social work, from business to education, approaching each possibility with the same thoroughness he had brought to his Afghanistan project. But perhaps the most meaningful change in our relationship came in the small, everyday moments. Marcus began joining me for my morning coffee before school, and we would talk about current events, his classes, or whatever was on his mind. He started asking me for advice on homework assignments, not because he needed help with the academic content, but because he valued my perspective and experience. The angry teenager who had called me worthless was replaced by a young man who introduced me to his friends with obvious pride, who defended me when one of his classmates made a disparaging comment about security guards, and who began talking about his future in terms of how he could make a positive difference in the world. One Saturday morning, about a month after our initial conversation about my military service, Marcus surprised me with a request that brought our relationship full circle. Dad, would you be willing to come to my school and speak to my history class about your experiences in Afghanistan? The idea of speaking publicly about my military service filled me with anxiety. I had spent nearly 2 decades keeping those experiences private, sharing them only with other veterans who could understand the context and complexity of combat. The thought of standing in front of a room full of teenagers and trying to explain the realities of war seemed overwhelming. Marcus, I'm not sure I'm the right person for something like that. I'm not a public speaker, and I'm not sure I could do justice to such an important topic. Marcus looked at me with an expression of quiet confidence that reminded me of his mother at her best. Dad, you're exactly the right person. These kids, they think about war the same way I used to think about it, like it's some kind of adventure or video game. They need to hear from someone who was actually there, someone who can help them understand what it really means. But what if I can't find the right words? What if I can't make them understand? Dad, you helped me understand. You changed my entire perspective on what it means to serve, what it means to sacrifice, what it means to be brave. If you can do that for your own son, you can do it for other people's children too. After much consideration and several conversations with my therapist about managing potential PTSD triggers, I agreed to speak to Marcus's class. The presentation was scheduled for the following month, giving me time to prepare and think about how to share my experiences in a way that would be both honest and appropriate for a teenage audience. As the date approached, I found myself revisiting the memories and artifacts in my metal box more frequently. I looked through photographs and letters, trying to identify the stories and lessons that would be most meaningful to share. I practiced talking about difficult subjects like PTSD and survivor's guilt, working with my therapist to find ways to discuss these topics without triggering my own symptoms. The morning of the presentation, I woke up feeling nervous but determined. Marcus had helped me prepare a collection of photographs, medals, and documents that would illustrate my stories and make the experience more tangible for his classmates. As we drove to school together, he offered me encouragement and reassurance that reminded me how much he had matured over the past few months. "Dad, you're going to do great. Just remember, these kids don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be honest." The history classroom was filled with about 30 students, all of whom turned to look at me with curiosity and respect as Marcus introduced me. Mrs. Patterson welcomed me warmly and explained to the class that they were fortunate to have the opportunity to learn from someone who had first-hand experience with the topics they had been studying. I began by showing them the same photographs that had opened Marcus's eyes to my military service. I explained the context of each image, describing the locations, the missions, and the people who had served alongside me. The students listened with an attention and respect that impressed me, asking thoughtful questions about everything from military equipment to Afghan culture. When I told them the story of earning my Bronze Star, the same story that I had shared with Marcus weeks earlier, the classroom fell completely silent. I could see in their faces the same shift in perspective that had transformed my relationship with my son. These teenagers were beginning to understand that war was not an abstract concept or a form of entertainment, but a reality that affected real people in profound and lasting ways. After describing the rescue that had earned me the medal, one student raised her hand and asked a question that went straight to the heart of the matter. "Mr. Mitchell, when you were running toward that burning vehicle while people were shooting at you, were you thinking about being a hero or were you just scared?" I appreciated her directness and the opportunity to address what I suspected many of them were wondering. I was absolutely terrified. I was sure I was going to die, and I was thinking about my family back home, including Marcus, who was just a baby at the time. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to save my friends. Another student asked about PTSD and how it had affected my life after returning from Afghanistan. This was one of the most difficult topics to discuss, but also one of the most important. I explained how combat trauma had changed my brain's response to stress, how certain sounds and situations could trigger flashbacks, and how I'd learned to manage these symptoms through therapy and careful life choices.
"The security job that my son used to be embarrassed about," I told them, looking at Marcus with a smile, "is actually perfect for me because it allows me to use my military training while avoiding the triggers that make my PTSD worse. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose a life that supports your mental health, even if other people don't understand your choices." The presentation lasted for 2 hours, far longer than originally planned, because the students had so many questions and seemed genuinely engaged with the material. When it was over, several of them approached me individually to thank me for sharing my story and to ask for advice about their own family members who were serving in the military. One young man named Tyler, who I later learned was the same Tyler whose father had bought him a car, stayed after class to speak with me privately. "Mr. Mitchell, my dad is always talking about success and achievement and making money, but listening to you today, I realize I've never heard him talk about serving other people or making sacrifices for something bigger than himself. Do you think that matters?" It was a profound question from someone who couldn't have been more than 16 years old. "Tyler, I think what matters most is that you figure out what kind of person you want to be and what kind of life will make you proud to look back on when you're my age. Money and material success can be part of a good life, but they're not the whole picture. The most successful people I know are the ones who have found ways to make a positive difference in other people's lives. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Mitchell, would it be okay if I asked you more questions sometime? Maybe about different ways to serve your country or your community? Of course, Tyler. You can reach out to me anytime. As Marcus and I drove home from school that afternoon, I felt a sense of completion that I hadn't experienced in years. The metal box that had sat hidden in my closet for so many years now sat open on a shelf in our living room. Its contents no longer secret, but integrated into our daily life. Marcus often looked through the photographs and documents, asking questions about specific people or events. He had started researching the history of my unit and the broader context of the Afghanistan conflict, not for school assignments, but out of genuine curiosity about this part of my life that had been hidden from him for so long. But perhaps most importantly, our relationship had evolved from one based on authority and obligation to one based on mutual respect and genuine friendship. Marcus no longer saw me as an authority figure to rebel against or a source of embarrassment to endure. Instead, he saw me as a complete person with a complex history, someone whose experiences and perspectives could help him navigate his own path through life. The changes in Marcus were equally dramatic. The angry, entitled teenager who had called me worthless had been replaced by a thoughtful young man who approached challenges with determination and treated other people with respect and empathy. His grades improved significantly, not because I pressured him to study harder, but because he had developed a genuine interest in learning and understanding the world around him. More importantly, Marcus began to think about his future in terms of service and contribution, rather than just personal achievement and material success. He started volunteering at a local veterans center, helping older veterans with basic computer skills and simply spending time listening to their stories. He began talking about college majors and career paths that would allow him to make a positive difference in other people's lives. One evening, about 3 months after our initial conversation about my military service, Marcus came home from the Veterans Center with news that both surprised and moved me. "Dad, I've been talking to some of the Vietnam veterans at the center, and they told me something I think you should know." "What's that, son?" "They said that a lot of them had the same experience you did. They came home from war and never talked about their service with their families. They said their kids grew up not knowing who their fathers really were, and some of them never figured it out because their dads died before they could share their stories." Marcus paused, clearly emotional about what he had learned. "Dad, they said I was lucky that you told me the truth while I was still young enough to really understand it and appreciate it. They said a lot of kids never get that chance." The weight of his words settled over me like a blanket. I thought about all the veterans I had known over the years who had struggled to connect with their children, men who had carried their military experiences like secret burdens rather than shared legacies. I thought about how differently my relationship with Marcus might have developed if I had taken my secrets to the grave. "Marcus, I think everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. If I had told you about my military service when you were younger, you might have grown up with unrealistic expectations about war and combat. You might have felt pressured to join the military yourself, or you might have been scared by stories you weren't ready to handle." I paused to gather my thoughts before continuing. "But more importantly, I think the fact that you could love and respect me without knowing about my military service proves that our relationship is built on something stronger than just my accomplishments. You had to learn to see me as a complete person, flaws and strengths and everything in between, and I had to learn to trust you with the most important parts of my identity." Marcus smiled. "So you think it was better this way?" "I think this way taught us both some important lessons. You learned not to judge people based on superficial things like job titles or income. I learned that keeping important parts of myself hidden from the people I love doesn't protect them, it just creates distance. And we both learned that real relationships require honesty, even when that honesty is difficult or scary. That evening, as we sat together at our kitchen table, working on homework and reading the news, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed in just a few short months. The metal box that had sat hidden in my closet for so many years now sat open on a shelf in our living room. Its contents no longer secret, but integrated into our daily life. Marcus often looked through the photographs and documents, asking questions about specific people or events. He had started researching the history of my unit and the broader context of the Afghanistan conflict, not for school assignments, but out of genuine curiosity about this part of my life that had been hidden from him for so long. But perhaps most importantly, our relationship had evolved from one based on authority and obligation to one based on mutual respect and genuine friendship. Marcus no longer saw me as an authority figure to rebel against or a source of embarrassment to endure. Instead, he saw me as a complete person with a complex history, someone whose experiences and perspectives could help him navigate his own path through life. The changes in Marcus were equally dramatic. The angry, entitled teenager who had called me worthless had been replaced by a thoughtful young man who approached challenges with determination and treated other people with respect and empathy. His grades improved significantly, not because I pressured him to study harder, but because he had developed a genuine interest in learning and understanding the world around him. More importantly, Marcus began to think about his future in terms of service and contribution, rather than just personal achievement and material success. He started volunteering at a local veteran center, helping older veterans with basic computer skills and simply spending time listening to their stories. He began talking about college majors and career paths that would allow him to make a positive difference in other people's lives. One evening, about 3 months after our initial conversation about my military service, Marcus came home from the Veteran Center with news that both surprised and moved me. "Dad, I've been talking to some of the Vietnam veterans at the center, and they told me something I think you should know." "What's that, son?" "They said that a lot of them had the same experience you did. They came home from war and never talked about their service with their families. They said their kids grew up not knowing who their fathers really were, and some of them never figured it out because their dads died before they could share their stories." Marcus paused, clearly emotional about what he had learned. "Dad, they said I was lucky that you told me the truth while I was still young enough to really understand it and appreciate it. They said a lot of kids never get that chance." The weight of his words settled over me like a blanket. I thought about all the veterans I had known over the years who had struggled to connect with their children, men who had carried their military experiences like secret burdens rather than shared legacies. I thought about how differently my relationship with Marcus might have developed if I had taken my secrets to the grave. "Marcus, I think everything happened the way it was supposed to happen. If I had told you about my military service when you were younger, you might have grown up with unrealistic expectations about war and combat. You might have felt pressured to join the military yourself, or you might have been scared by stories you weren't ready to handle." I paused to gather my thoughts before continuing. "But more importantly, I think the fact that you could love and respect me without knowing about my military service proves that our relationship is built on something stronger than just my accomplishments. You had to learn to see me as a complete person, flaws and strengths and everything in between, and I had to learn to trust you with the most important parts of my identity." Marcus smiled. "So you think it was better this way?" "I think this way taught us both some important lessons. You learned not to judge people based on superficial things like job titles or income. I learned that keeping important parts of myself hidden from the people I love doesn't protect them, it just creates distance. And we both learned that real relationships require honesty, even when that honesty is difficult or scary." That evening, as we sat together at our kitchen table, working on homework and reading the news, I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed in just a few short months. The metal box that had sat hidden in my closet for so many years now sat open on a shelf in our living room. Its contents no longer secret, but integrated into our daily life. Marcus often looked through the photos.
I want to help veterans tell their stories and help families understand each other better. The pride I felt in that moment was different from any pride I had experienced during my military service. This was the pride of a father, watching his son choose a path that reflected the best values and lessons they had shared together. Marcus wasn't following in my footsteps by joining the military,
but he was following the deeper example I had tried to set about service, sacrifice, and helping other people. Marcus, I couldn't be more proud of you. Not because you chose a career that has anything to do with my military service, but because you chose a career that will allow you to serve other people and make their lives better. That's what really matters. As I write this story, it has been almost a year since Marcus first screamed that I was worthless and then discovered the truth about my military service. Our apartment hasn't changed much in practical terms. I still work as a security guard at the Riverside Shopping Center, and we still live in the same small space overlooking the Portland skyline. But everything that really matters has been transformed. Marcus will be starting college in the fall, having been accepted to several schools with strong social work programs. He has chosen to attend Portland State University, partly because of their excellent Veteran Services program, and partly because he wants to continue living at home and working at the Veterans Center while he completes his degree. Our relationship has become everything I had hoped it could be when he was a small child, but had thought was lost forever during his difficult teenage years. We talk openly about everything, from current events to personal struggles, from family history to future dreams. Marcus asks for my advice on important decisions, and I ask for his perspective on issues where his generation has insights that mine lacks. Most importantly, Marcus has learned that real strength isn't about material success or social status, but about integrity, service, and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. He has learned that real success isn't measured in salary figures or job titles, but in the positive impact you have on other people's lives. And I have learned that trust requires vulnerability, that love requires honesty, and that the most important gift I can give my son is not protection from difficult truths, but the confidence to handle those truths with wisdom and maturity. The metal box that once sat hidden in my closet now serves a completely different purpose. Instead of containing secrets that separated me from my family, it holds memories and artifacts that connect us to a shared understanding of service, sacrifice, and the complex ways that love expresses itself across generations. Marcus often brings friends over to look through the photographs and hear stories about my military service. Our small apartment has become a place where young people come to learn about history, not from textbooks, but from someone who lived it. These conversations have become some of the most meaningful experiences of my civilian life, opportunities to share the lessons of military service with a new generation in ways that honor both the sacrifices of the past and the possibilities of the future. Sometimes people ask me if I regret waiting so long to tell Marcus about my military service, if I wish I had shared these stories with him when he was younger. The answer is complicated. I will always wonder how our relationship might have developed differently if I had been more open from the beginning. But I also believe that the journey we took to reach this understanding was exactly the journey we needed to take. Marcus had to learn to love and respect me based on who I was as his father, not what I had accomplished as a soldier. He had to develop his own sense of identity and values before he could truly appreciate the significance of military service and sacrifice. And I had to learn to trust him with the most important parts of my identity, to believe that he was strong enough and mature enough to handle difficult truths. Most importantly, we both had to learn that real relationships require constant communication, honest vulnerability, and the willingness to see each other as complete, complex human beings rather than simple roles or expectations. The young man who once called me worthless now introduces me to his friends as his hero. But I know the truth is more complicated than that. We are both heroes in our own ways, and we are both ordinary people dealing with the universal challenges of family, identity, and finding meaning in life. The difference is that now we face those challenges together, with honesty and mutual respect and a shared understanding of what really matters. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't earning medals for courage under fire in Afghanistan. It was earning the trust and respect of my own son by finally having the courage to share who I really am. And the greatest medal I could ever receive is seeing Marcus choose a path in life that reflects the values we discovered together. Values of service and integrity, and the fundamental truth that our greatest strength comes from helping other people discover their own. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late August, just 2 weeks before Marcus was supposed to start his freshman year at Portland State University. I was getting ready for my afternoon shift at the mall when I heard him calling from the kitchen, his voice carrying an excitement I hadn't heard since the day he had been accepted to college. "Dad, you need to see this right now." I found him standing at our kitchen table holding an official-looking envelope with the Department of Veterans Affairs letterhead. His hands were shaking slightly as he held out a formal document that would change both of our lives in ways I never could have anticipated. "Dad, it's addressed to you, but it's about both of us," Marcus said, his eyes bright with something between amazement and disbelief. "Dad, they want to feature our story in a national campaign about veteran families." I took the letter from his hands and read it slowly, my coffee growing cold as I processed what the Department of Veterans Affairs representative was proposing. The Department of Veterans Affairs had somehow learned about the presentation I had given at Marcus's school, and they wanted to interview both of us for a documentary project about the importance of veterans sharing their experiences with their families. The letter explained that too many veteran families struggled with communication barriers similar to what Marcus and I had experienced. They wanted to use our story as an example of how honesty and openness could transform relationships and help both veterans and their children understand each other better. The project would involve professional interviews, some filming at our apartment, and potentially speaking at veteran events across the Pacific Northwest. "Marcus, how did they even find out about us?" I asked, still trying to understand how our private family transformation had come to the attention of federal officials. "Remember Mrs. Patterson? She submitted my Afghanistan project to some kind of state education competition, and apparently it won an award for student research on military families. The VA saw it and reached out to the school to contact us." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what they were proposing. The idea of sharing our story with a national audience felt both terrifying and potentially meaningful. For nearly 2 decades, I had kept my military experiences private, sharing them only with other veterans who could understand the context. Now they wanted me to tell that story to families across the country. "Dad, we have to do this," Marcus said, sitting down across from me with the same determined expression he had worn when asking me to speak at his school. "Think about how many fathers and sons are going through exactly what we went through. Think about how many kids are ashamed of their veteran parents because they don't understand what military service really means." He was right, and I knew it. Our conversation that had started with Marcus calling me worthless ultimately brought us closer together than I had ever thought possible. If sharing that journey could help other families avoid the pain we had experienced, then maybe it was worth the discomfort of speaking publicly about deeply personal experiences. "What exactly would we have to do?" I asked, reading through the details of their proposal. "They want to interview us separately and together about our relationship before and after I learned about your military service. They want to film some of our daily routine, maybe show us looking through your medals and photographs, and they want us to speak at a few veteran events where families can ask questions and share their own experiences." The more I thought about it, the more I realized this opportunity represented something larger than just our personal story. Marcus had already decided to study social work with a focus on veteran families. This project could give him real-world experience in the field he wanted to enter, while also allowing me to use my military experience to help other veterans in a way I had never considered before. "Let's do it," I said finally, "but I have some conditions."
Marcus leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of conditions?" "First, we control how much detail we share about my combat experiences. I'm willing to talk about the impact of military service on families, but I'm not going to provide graphic descriptions of violence or trauma that could be harmful to children who might see this documentary." Marcus nodded. "That makes sense. What else?" "Second, we make it clear that every veteran family is different.
Our story worked out well, but that doesn't mean every family should handle these conversations the same way. Some veterans have experiences that are too traumatic to share with their children, and some children aren't ready to handle difficult truths about their parents' military service. Agreed. Anything else? Third, if at any point during this process my PTSD symptoms become problematic, we stop. I won't sacrifice my mental health or our relationship for a documentary project, no matter how important the message might be. Marcus reached across the table and put his hand on my arm. Dad, if you start having problems, we'll stop immediately. Your health and our family come first, always. 2 weeks later, a small film crew arrived at our apartment to begin documenting our story. The director, a woman named Sarah Chen, who had previously worked on several award-winning documentaries about veteran issues, spent the first day just talking with Marcus and me about our experiences without any cameras rolling. Sarah was a second-generation immigrant whose father had served in Vietnam, and she understood the cultural barriers that often prevented veteran families from discussing military service openly. She explained that the documentary would focus not on the details of combat, but on the relationship dynamics between veterans and their children, and how those relationships could be strengthened through honest communication. What we're really trying to explore, Sarah explained, is how military service affects entire families, not just the veterans themselves. Children of veterans often grow up with questions they're afraid to ask and parents who are afraid to answer them. Your story shows that those conversations, however difficult they might be, can ultimately bring families closer together. The filming process was both emotionally challenging and surprisingly therapeutic. Marcus and I were interviewed separately about our perspectives on our relationship before and after our conversation about my military service. We were filmed looking through my medals and photographs, with Marcus asking questions about specific people and events that he hadn't had the opportunity to explore in our initial conversations. One of the most powerful moments came when the cameras captured Marcus reading the letter from Staff Sergeant Williams's widow for the first time. Sarah had asked him to read it aloud, and as he spoke the words that Sarah Williams had written to me after her husband's funeral, I could see him truly understanding the weight of loss that many military families carry. She writes about how her husband used to tell her about your conversations, about how you helped him deal with being away from his daughters. Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. Dad, you never told me that you were helping other soldiers cope with missing their families. That's what we did for each other over there, son. We helped each other get through each day, and we helped each other remember what we were fighting to get back to. The filming also included scenes of our daily life together, showing how our relationship had evolved since our initial conversation about my military service. The cameras captured us having breakfast together before school and work, working on homework together at our kitchen table, and talking through current events and personal challenges in ways that demonstrated the mutual respect and genuine friendship our relationship had become. Perhaps the most meaningful part of the documentary process was when Sarah arranged for us to meet with other veteran families who were struggling with similar communication challenges. These conversations, filmed at a local veterans center, showed Marcus and me in the role of mentors and advisors, helping other fathers and children navigate difficult conversations about military service and family identity. One family that particularly moved both of us was the Rodriguez family. Carmen Rodriguez was a single mother whose ex-husband had served 2 tours in Iraq before their divorce. Their 15-year-old son Diego had never had a positive relationship with his father, who struggled with severe PTSD and alcohol abuse. Diego had grown up seeing his father's military service as something that had damaged their family rather than something to be proud of. Marcus spent time talking with Diego about the anger and resentment he had felt toward me before learning about my military service. He shared how his perspective had changed not just about my career choices, but about his understanding of strength, sacrifice, and what it means to serve something larger than yourself. I used to think my dad was weak because he worked as a security guard instead of having some important job, Marcus told Diego. But now I understand that he chose that job because it allowed him to be present for me while still managing his own struggles with PTSD. That's not weakness, that's actually incredible strength. Meanwhile, I found myself talking with Carmen about the challenges of helping children understanding the complexity of military service and veteran issues. We discussed how to acknowledge the real difficulties that military families face while still helping children appreciate the sacrifices their parents had made. The military changes people, I explained to Carmen and the cameras. Sometimes those changes are positive, like developing leadership skills and learning to work as part of a team. But sometimes those changes involve trauma that affect veterans for the rest of their lives. The key is helping children understand that their parents' military service was both meaningful and difficult, and that they can be proud of the service while also acknowledging its costs. These conversations revealed something important about the impact our story was having beyond just our own family. Marcus had developed a natural ability to connect with other teenagers who were struggling to understand their veteran parents. His experience of moving from anger and resentment to respect and pride gave him credibility with young people who were dealing with similar emotions. At the same time, I discovered that sharing my story with other veterans and their families was helping me process my own experiences in new ways. For years, I had thought about my military service primarily in terms of its impact on my own mental health and family relationships. But talking with other veteran families helped me see my service as part of a larger story about sacrifice, duty, and the ongoing challenges facing military communities. The documentary project lasted for 3 months, during which time Marcus started his freshman year at Portland State University. His course load included Introduction to Social Work, Psychology of Human Development, and a special seminar on veteran and military family issues. The knowledge he was gaining in his classes enhanced the conversations we were having for the documentary, and vice versa. One evening, after a particularly intensive day of filming interviews with several veteran families, Marcus came home from his university classes with news that surprised both of us. "Dad, my professor in the military family seminar saw some of the preliminary footage from our documentary. She wants to know if we would be interested in developing a peer support program for children of veterans at the university." The idea was intriguing, but also daunting. The professor, Dr. Lisa Hannigan, was a clinical social worker who specialized in military family therapy. She had been working with the university's Veteran Services Office to develop programs that would support not just student veterans, but also the children of veterans who were attending college. She thinks our story demonstrates the kind of communication breakthrough that many military families need, Marcus continued. She wants to create a program where student children of veterans can meet regularly to discuss their experiences and learn from families like ours who have found ways to bridge the communication gap. I was immediately interested in the potential impact such a program could have, but I was also concerned about our ability to take on additional responsibilities while still managing the documentary project and our regular commitments to work and school. "Marcus, that sounds like an incredible opportunity, but I want to make sure we're not overcommitting ourselves. The documentary project is already requiring a lot of emotional energy, and I don't want to sacrifice your academic performance or my job responsibilities." "I've thought about that too, Dad. Dr. Hannigan said the program would only meet twice a month, and it would actually count as practicum credit toward my social work degree. So instead of adding to my course load, it would be replacing other requirements."
What would my role be in something like this? You would be a resource person, someone that students could talk to about specific questions or challenges related to their veteran parents. You wouldn't have to commit to regular attendance, just be available when students have questions that other peer counselors can't answer. The more we discussed it, the more the program seemed like a natural extension of the work we were already doing through the documentary project. We were already talking with veteran families about communication strategies and relationship building. Formalizing that work through the university would give us access to professional supervision and evidence-based practices that could make our efforts more effective. Dr. Hannigan met with us the following week to discuss the details of the proposed program. She was a soft-spoken woman in her early 50s who had been working with military families for over 20 years. Her own father had served in Vietnam, and she understood both the professional and personal dimensions of the issues we were addressing. "What we're seeing," Dr. Hannigan explained, "is that many children of veterans arrive at college with unresolved questions and emotions about their parents' military service. Some are angry about the impact of PTSD on their families.
Others are confused about their own identity and whether they should consider military service themselves. Still others are proud of their parents but don't know how to process difficult emotions about war and violence. She showed us research indicating that children of veterans were more likely than their peers to experience anxiety, depression, and relationship difficulties during their college years. But the same research showed that children of veterans who had positive communication with their parents about military service were actually more resilient and successful than the general college population. Your story illustrates the transformative power of honest, age-appropriate communication between veterans and their children, Dr. Hannigan said. We want to create a program that helps other families achieve similar breakthroughs. The program would involve monthly group meetings where students could share their experiences and challenges related to being children of veterans. Marcus would be trained as a peer counselor, learning facilitation skills and crisis intervention techniques. I would attend some meetings as a resource person, available to answer questions about military service and veteran issues that the students might not feel comfortable asking their own parents. We agreed to participate in the program on a trial basis, with the understanding that we could adjust our level of involvement based on how well it worked with our other commitments. The program launched in January, coinciding with the beginning of Marcus's second semester. The first meeting was held in a small conference room at the university's Veterans Services Office. 7 students attended, ranging from freshmen to graduate students, all of whom had at least one parent who had served in the military. The diversity of their experiences was immediately apparent. Jennifer was a sophomore whose father had been killed in Iraq when she was 12 years old. She struggled with survivor guilt and anger about a war she didn't understand. David was a senior whose mother had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and now worked as a military contractor. He was proud of his mother's service, but worried about the emotional distance that had developed between them since her deployments. Sarah was a freshman whose father had served in the Navy during peacetime, but struggled with alcohol abuse that she believed was related to his military culture. Michael was a graduate student whose parents had both served in the Air Force and had encouraged him to consider military service himself, but he was conflicted about whether that path was right for him. Marcus facilitated the first discussion with a maturity and skill that impressed both Dr. Hannigan and me. He began by sharing his own experience of growing up not knowing about my military service, describing the anger and resentment he had felt and the transformation that had occurred when we finally had an honest conversation about my experiences. I spent years being ashamed of my dad because I thought he was just a security guard who couldn't get a better job. I had no idea that he was a decorated combat veteran who had saved people's lives and earned medals for courage under fire. The problem wasn't that he was a failure, the problem was that we had never talked honestly about who he really was. The other students responded with their own stories, many of which echoed themes similar to our own experience. Several students described feeling disconnected from their veteran parents, unable to understand the impact of military service on their families. Others talked about feeling pressured to live up to their parents' military accomplishments or struggling with their own attitudes toward war and violence. Jennifer, whose father had been killed in Iraq, shared that she had spent years angry at the military for taking her father away from her. I used to think that his service was selfish, that he chose the army over our family. But talking to other military kids, I'm starting to understand that it was more complicated than that. David talked about his mother's emotional unavailability since returning from Afghanistan. She can talk about anything except her deployments. I know something happened over there that changed her, but she won't tell me what it was. I feel like I'm living with a stranger who looks like my mom. These conversations were emotionally challenging for everyone involved, but they were also clearly beneficial. Students who had felt isolated and confused about their experiences discovered that they were not alone. They learned coping strategies from each other and developed a vocabulary for discussing military family issues that many of them had never had before. My role in these meetings was primarily to provide context and perspective on military service and veteran issues. When students had questions about PTSD, combat trauma, or the transition from military to civilian life, I could offer insights based on my own experiences and those of other veterans I had known. One of the most meaningful conversations occurred during our third meeting when Michael asked me directly whether I thought children of veterans should feel obligated to serve in the military themselves. My parents are both retired Air Force officers, Michael explained. They've never directly pressured me to join the military, but I can tell they would be proud if I did. At the same time, I'm not sure it's the right path for me. I'm studying environmental science, and I'm more interested in working on climate change issues than military service. It was exactly the kind of question that demonstrated why these peer support groups were so important. Michael needed to hear from someone who could speak with authority about military service while also supporting his right to choose his own path. Michael, I served 3 tours in Afghanistan because I believed it was the right thing to do at that time in my life. But I would never want my son or anyone else's child to join the military out of obligation or family pressure. Military service is a calling, not an inheritance. If you feel called to serve your country through environmental work, that's just as valuable as serving through the military. I looked around the room at the other students, wanting to make sure they all understood this point. Your parents' military service was their contribution to something larger than themselves. Your job is to find your own way to contribute to something larger than yourself. That might be through military service, but it might also be through education, healthcare, environmental protection, social work, or any number of other paths. Marcus added his own perspective to this conversation. For a long time, I felt like I had to choose between being proud of my dad's military service and pursuing my own interests in social work. I thought maybe I was disappointing him by not wanting to join the army. But what I learned is that the values that made him a good soldier, like serving others and doing what's right even when it's hard, those are the same values that will make me a good social worker. These discussions helped all of us, students and facilitators alike, develop a more nuanced understanding of military family dynamics. We learned that there was no single template for successful military families, no one-size-fits-all approach to communication or relationship building.
The veteran, James Patterson, had served 2 tours in Vietnam, but had never spoken about his experiences with his family. His son Robert, now 35 years old and a father himself, had reached out to ask about his father's military service. Your story gave my son the courage to ask questions he had been wondering about for decades, James wrote, and it gave me permission to share experiences I had kept buried for 40 years. We recently had a conversation that I never thought was possible, and our relationship has been transformed as a result. The letter went on to describe how Robert's understanding of his father's post-war struggles with depression and alcohol abuse had changed once he learned about his father's combat experiences in Vietnam. Instead of seeing these struggles as character flaws, Robert now understood them as the long-term effects of trauma that his father had carried silently for decades. My grandson, who is now 15, has been asking questions about our family's military history, James continued. Because of the conversation Robert and I were able to have, we're now able to share these stories with the next generation in a way that honors both the service and the sacrifice involved. Letters like this one reminded Marcus and me that our story was part of a much larger national conversation about military families and the importance of intergenerational communication about service and sacrifice. We were helping to break down cultural barriers that had prevented many families from having honest conversations about the impact of military service on veterans and their children. As we approached the 1-year anniversary of our initial conversation about my military service, Marcus and I reflected on how dramatically our lives had changed. Our relationship had been transformed from one characterized by anger and misunderstanding to one based on mutual respect, open communication, and shared purpose. But more importantly, we had discovered that our personal transformation could serve a larger purpose by helping other families navigate similar challenges. The work we were doing with veteran families had given both of us a sense of meaning and contribution that extended far beyond our own relationship. Dad, do you ever think about what would have happened if I had never found your medals? If we had never had that first conversation about your military service? It was a question I had considered many times over the past year.
I think we probably would have continued to drift apart, Marcus. You would have finished high school still feeling ashamed of me, and you probably would have chosen a college far away from home. We might have maintained a polite but distant relationship for the rest of our lives. But instead, we found a way to really understand each other. More than that, son, we found a way to use our understanding to help other families. Our story became something larger than just our personal relationship. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I used to think the most important thing was for me to be successful in ways that would make you proud. But now I understand that the most important thing is for both of us to live in ways that make a positive difference in the world. As I looked at my son, now 19 years old and well on his way to becoming a professional social worker specializing in veteran families, I realized that the angry teenager who had once called me worthless had become a young man whose life reflected the very best values of military service. Dedication to something larger than himself, commitment to helping others, and the courage to do difficult work in service of a greater good. The medals in our living room were no longer hidden secrets, but tools for education and inspiration. The photographs from my military service had become conversation starters for discussions about service, sacrifice, and the complex relationships between veterans and their families. And the painful period of miscommunication and anger that had once threatened to destroy our relationship had become the foundation for work that was helping families across the country. In the end, the greatest medal I could ever earn was seeing my son choose a path that honored both his own gifts and talents and the values that had motivated my military service. The words "you're worthless" that had once cut so deeply had been replaced by a relationship built on understanding, respect, and shared commitment to serving others. And the medals that had been hidden in my closet for so many years had become the bridge that allowed us to build not just a better relationship between father and son, but a legacy of service that would continue long after both of us were gone. 5 years later, I stood in the back of a packed auditorium at the Portland Convention Center watching my son address an audience of over 800 veteran families from across the Pacific Northwest. Marcus, now 22 and in his final semester of graduate school, commanded the stage with a confidence and authority that still amazed me. The annual Northwest Military Family Conference had grown from a small regional gathering to one of the largest events of its kind in the country, and Marcus had been invited as the keynote speaker. His presentation, titled "Breaking the Silence: How Truth Transforms Military Families," drew from years of research, clinical experience, and our ongoing work with veteran families throughout the region. When I was 17 years old, Marcus told the audience, I believed my father was the greatest failure I had ever known. He worked as a mall security guard, rode the bus to work, and lived in a tiny apartment that embarrassed me in front of my friends. I was so ashamed of him that I used to lie about what he did for work. The audience was completely silent, drawn into a story that many of them recognized from their own family experiences. Marcus had learned to use our personal journey as a framework for discussing the broader challenges facing military families, but he had also developed the clinical expertise to help families develop practical strategies for improving communication and understanding. What I didn't know, Marcus continued, was that my father was a decorated combat veteran who had earned a Bronze Star for saving 3 soldiers' lives under enemy fire in Afghanistan. I didn't know that he had chosen his job specifically because it allowed him to manage his PTSD while still being present for me. I didn't know that every decision he made was designed to protect me from the trauma he carried. As I listened to Marcus speak, I reflected on how profoundly both of our lives had changed since that angry confrontation in our kitchen 5 years earlier. Marcus had not only completed his undergraduate degree in social work, but had gone on to earn a master's degree with a specialty in military family therapy. His thesis research on communication patterns in veteran families had been published in several professional journals and was being used to develop new treatment protocols at VA medical centers across the country. But more importantly, Marcus had become exactly the kind of person I had hoped he would become when he was a small child. Someone who used his intelligence and skills to help other people. Someone who understood that real strength comes from service to others. And someone who had learned to see past surface appearances to understand the complex realities of other people's lives.
The transformation in our relationship began, Marcus told the audience, when my father finally trusted me with the truth about who he really was. But that transformation didn't happen overnight. It required years of honest conversation, mutual respect, and the willingness to see each other as complete human beings rather than just roles or expectations. The presentation included video testimonies from families we had worked with over the past 5 years, showing the long-term impact of improved communication on military families. There was the Johnson family from Seattle, where a teenage daughter had learned to understand her mother's deployment-related anxiety as a symptom of trauma rather than personal weakness. The Martinez family from Eugene, where an adult son had reconnected with his Vietnam veteran father after decades of estrangement. The Thompson family from Spokane, where 3 generations of military service were finally able to discuss their experiences openly and supportively. Each of these families had found their own path to better communication and understanding, but all of them credited their initial breakthrough to conversations inspired by our story. The documentary about our family had now been translated into 12 languages and was being used by military family support programs in countries around the world. After Marcus finished his presentation, the conference organizers opened the floor for questions from the audience. The first question came from a woman whose husband had recently returned from his 4th deployment to Afghanistan and was struggling with severe PTSD. "My teenage son is angry all the time because his father isn't the same person who left for deployment," she explained. "How do I help my son understand that his father's changes aren't his fault and aren't a reflection of how much his father loves him?" Marcus fielded the question with the combination of personal insight and professional expertise that had made him one of the most sought-after speakers on military family issues. "The first step," he said, "is helping your son understand that PTSD is an injury, not a character flaw. Combat trauma changes the brain in measurable physical ways. Your husband didn't choose to develop PTSD any more than someone chooses to develop a broken leg." He went on to provide specific strategies for age-appropriate conversations about trauma, resources for family therapy that specialized in military issues, and techniques for helping children maintain connection with parents who were struggling with mental health challenges. The questions continued for over an hour, covering everything from how to discuss combat experiences with young children to strategies for supporting veterans who were transitioning to civilian careers. Marcus answered each question with patience and compassion, drawing from both his academic training and his personal experience as the child of a veteran. After the conference ended, Marcus and I drove home together through the familiar streets of Portland, reflecting on how far we had both come since our first difficult conversation about my military service. "Dad, did you ever imagine when you first showed me your medals that we would end up doing this kind of work together?" I thought about the question as we passed the shopping mall where I still worked part-time, though my role had evolved significantly over the years. The mall's management had created a new position for me as community liaison, recognizing that my military...
I never imagined that sharing our story would become a way to help other families, or that you would build your career around this work. Do you ever regret the path we took? Do you ever wish you had told me about your service earlier, or handled things differently? It was a question Marcus asked periodically, and my answer had evolved over the years as I had gained perspective on our journey. "Son, I think everything happened exactly the way it needed to happen. If I had told you about my military service when you were younger, you might not have developed the empathy and understanding necessary to help other military families. Your experience of feeling angry and disconnected from a veteran parent is exactly what makes you effective at helping other children in similar situations." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that too. When I work with teenage children of veterans who are angry at their parents, I can relate to their emotions in a way that therapists who didn't have that experience might not be able to. And when I talk to veterans who are afraid to share their military experiences with their children," I added, "I can understand their fears because I lived with those fears for 18 years. As we pulled into the parking garage of our apartment building, I reflected on how our living situation had also evolved over the years. We had moved to a larger apartment in the same building, giving Marcus his own space while maintaining the close relationship we had developed. Marcus was planning to move into his own apartment after graduation, but he had chosen to stay in Portland to continue his work with military families in the region. "Dad, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about."
Marcus said as we rode the elevator to our floor. "I've been offered a position with the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C. It's a chance to develop family support programs at the national level, working directly with policymakers and military leadership." The news was both exciting and concerning. I was incredibly proud that Marcus's expertise was being recognized at the national level, but I was also aware of how much I had come to depend on our regular conversations and collaboration. "That sounds like an incredible opportunity, Marcus. Tell me more about what the position would involve." "I would be working with a team of clinicians and researchers to develop evidence-based programs for military families. The position would involve traveling to military bases around the country, training family support staff, and working with Congress on legislation related to veteran family services." "And how do you feel about the possibility of moving to Washington?" Marcus was quiet for a moment as we entered our apartment. "I'm excited about the professional opportunities, but I'm also worried about leaving you. We've built such a strong partnership over the past few years, and I don't want to abandon the work we're doing here in Portland." I sat down at our kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had first seen my medals 5 years earlier. "Son, this position sounds like exactly the kind of opportunity you've been preparing for throughout your education and training. If you turn it down because you're worried about me, you'll be making the same mistake I made when I kept my military service secret to protect you." "What do you mean?" "I mean that sometimes the people we love need us to trust them to handle difficult situations on their own. I kept my military service secret because I thought it would protect you, but actually it prevented you from understanding who I really was. If you turn down this position because you think I can't handle your absence, you'll be making decisions based on fear rather than faith in our relationship." Marcus looked at me with the same serious expression he had worn during our first conversation about my military service. "So you think I should take the position?" "I think you should take the position because it represents the next step in your professional development and because it will allow you to help military families at a scale that neither of us could achieve working in Portland alone." "But what about our work here? What about the families we're currently helping?" I smiled, remembering similar conversations we had when Marcus was deciding whether to take his first internship with the VA. "Marcus, the work we've done together has trained other people to continue helping families in this region. Dr. Hannigan has a whole team of graduate students who learned family therapy techniques by working with us. The peer support program at the university is now part of the regular curriculum. The work will continue even if we're not directly involved." Over the following weeks, Marcus carefully considered the position in Washington, consulting with his professors, mentors, and colleagues about the opportunities and challenges it would present. He ultimately decided to accept the position, beginning work at the VA headquarters the following fall. The transition was emotional for both of us, but it was also a natural progression in our relationship and our shared commitment to helping military families. Marcus was no longer the angry teenager who needed his father's constant presence and guidance. He had become a professional social worker with his own expertise and responsibilities. At the same time, I was no longer the isolated veteran who had kept his military experiences secret from his family. I had developed my own network of professional relationships and community involvement that extended far beyond my relationship with Marcus. The farewell dinner Marcus's colleagues organized before his move to Washington was attended by over 50 people whose lives had been touched by our work together. Veterans and their families, university faculty and students, VA staff members, and community volunteers gathered to celebrate Marcus's achievements and to reflect on the impact our story had had on the Portland military community. Dr. Hannigan spoke about how our family's transformation had inspired the development of new treatment approaches for military families throughout the region. Several of the students who had participated in the peer support program shared stories about how their own family relationships had improved as a result of conversations facilitated by Marcus and me. But perhaps the most meaningful tribute came from Jennifer Williams, the college student whose father had been killed in Iraq. Jennifer had graduated the previous year and was now working as a victims advocate, helping families cope with trauma and loss. "When I first met Frank and Marcus," Jennifer told the audience, "I was angry at the military for taking my father away from me. I couldn't understand why he had chosen to serve, and I resented his memory because I felt like he had abandoned our family." Jennifer paused, clearly emotional about sharing such personal reflections with a large audience.
But listening to Frank talk about his military service and watching the relationship between Frank and Marcus helped me understand that my father's choice to serve was actually an expression of his love for our family and our country. He wasn't abandoning us. He was trying to make the world safer for us. More importantly, Jennifer continued, Marcus helped me understand that my anger was a normal response to loss, and that I could honor my father's memory by using my own experiences to help other families dealing with similar trauma. Frank and Marcus didn't just repair their own relationship, they showed all of us that family relationships damaged by military service could be healed, and that those healed relationships could become sources of strength for entire communities. As I listened to Jennifer speak, I realized that our story had become something much larger than just the personal transformation of a father and son. Our willingness to share our struggles and our healing had given other families permission to have their own difficult conversations and to seek their own paths to understanding and reconciliation. The evening concluded with Marcus presenting me with a framed photograph that captured the essence of our journey together. The image showed the two of us at a recent veteran family conference, standing together in front of a display that included my medals, photographs from my military service, and materials from the family support programs we had helped develop. But what made the photograph special was not the professional context, but the obvious affection and respect visible in our body language. We stood with our arms around each other's shoulders, both of us smiling with genuine happiness and pride. It was the image of a father and son who had found their way back to each other and had used that reconciliation to create something meaningful for other families. "Dad," Marcus said as he presented the photograph, "this picture represents everything we've accomplished together."
5 years ago, we could barely have a civil conversation. Today, we're partners in work that matters to both of us, and we're friends who genuinely enjoy each other's company. As Marcus prepared for his move to Washington, we spent our final weeks together visiting some of the families we had worked with over the years, checking in on their progress and offering continued support. These visits reinforced our understanding of the long-term impact that improved family communication could have on military families. The Rodriguez family, whom we had first met during the documentary filming, had continued to make progress in their relationship. Diego, now 20 years old and a college junior studying psychology, had maintained a relationship with his father despite his parents' divorce. He was considering a career in military family therapy, inspired partly by his own experiences and partly by the work he had seen Marcus and me doing. Carmen Rodriguez had also remarried to another veteran who was more emotionally available than her first husband. The blended family was successfully navigating the challenges of military life, with all the children developing healthy relationships with both their biological father and their stepfather. "Your story gave us hope that broken relationships could be repaired," Carmen told us during our final visit. "But more importantly, it gave us practical tools for communicating better and understanding each other's perspectives." The evening before Marcus left for Washington, we sat together on our apartment balcony one last time, looking out at the Portland skyline and reflecting on our journey together. "Dad, do you remember what you said to me the night I called you worthless, after I found your medals and we had our first real conversation?" I remembered that conversation vividly, though it felt like it had happened to different people. I told you that love wasn't simple for me, that it was something you prove rather than something you say. Do you still feel that way? I thought about the question carefully, recognizing that my understanding of love and family relationships had evolved significantly over the past 5 years. "Marcus, I think love is both something you say and something you prove. The words matter because they help people understand your feelings and intentions. But the actions matter because they demonstrate your commitment over time. And do you think we've proven our love for each other?" "Son, I think we've proven that love can survive misunderstanding, anger, and even periods of genuine dislike. We've proven that relationships can be repaired when people are willing to be honest with each other and to see past their own hurt feelings to understand the other person's perspective." Marcus nodded. "I used to think that strong families were families that never had problems or conflicts, but now I understand that strong families are families that can work through problems and conflicts together. And I used to think that protecting you meant keeping difficult truths hidden from you," I added. "But now I understand that protecting you means trusting you to handle difficult truths with wisdom and maturity."
As we said goodbye the next morning, I felt a mixture of pride, sadness, and hope that reminded me of the emotions I had experienced when Marcus was a small child taking his first steps. I was sad to see him leave, but I was also proud of the man he had become and hopeful about the impact he would have in his new position. Dad, I want you to know that everything good about who I've become, I learned from you. Not just from your military service, but from watching how you handled challenges, how you treated other people, and how you put family above personal pride. Marcus, everything I'm proud of in my life is connected to being your father. Your success, your character, your commitment to helping other people, that's the real Medal of Honor for any parent. 6 months later, I received a call from Marcus with news that brought our story full circle in the most unexpected way. He was calling from Walter Reed Medical Center, where he had been working with a military family whose situation closely paralleled our own experience 5 years earlier. Dad, I'm working with a Marine Corps sergeant who served 3 tours in Iraq and is now struggling with severe PTSD. His 16-year-old son thinks his father is weak and unreliable because he can't hold down a steady job and has panic attacks in crowded places. Marcus went on to describe how he had shared our story with this family, helping the teenage son understand that his father's struggles were the result of trauma sustained while serving his country, not character flaws or personal weaknesses. When I told the son about how I used to be ashamed of you for working as a security guard and how my perspective changed when I learned about your Bronze Star, he started crying. He said he had never considered that his dad might be dealing with things he didn't understand. Were you able to help them have a productive conversation? We had a family session where the father shared some of his military experiences and explained how PTSD affects his daily life. The son asked questions about his father's service and began to understand the courage and sacrifice in military deployment. Marcus paused before continuing with the most meaningful part of the story. At the end of the session, the son looked at his father and said, "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't understand. I'm proud of you for serving our country, and I'm proud of you for getting help with your PTSD. It sounds like you were able to help them find the same breakthrough we experienced." Dad, at that moment, I realized that this is why everything happened the way it did. Our difficult period, our conversation about your medals, all the work we've done together over the past 5 years, it was all preparation for me to help other families in exactly this situation. As I hung up the phone, I reflected on the unexpected ways that personal pain can be transformed into professional purpose. The angry words Marcus had spoken 5 years earlier, the shame and disappointment we had both felt during our period of estrangement, had become the foundation for work that was helping families across the country. Today, as I write this final chapter of our story, Marcus is thriving in his position at the Department of Veterans Affairs, developing programs that are being implemented at military installations worldwide. I continue to work part-time at the shopping center while also serving as a volunteer counselor for veteran families in the Portland area. Our relationship has evolved into exactly what I had hoped it could become when Marcus was a small child, a friendship between 2 adults who respect each other, support each other's goals, and enjoy each other's company. We talk regularly about his work in Washington, my activities in Portland, and our shared interest in military family issues. But perhaps most importantly, we have both learned that the strongest relationships are built not on the absence of conflict, but on the ability to work through conflict together. The son who once called me worthless taught me that real strength requires vulnerability, that real love requires honesty, and that real healing requires the courage to trust the people we love with our deepest truths. The medals that sat hidden in my closet for 18 years now sit openly in my living room, not as symbols of personal achievement, but as reminders that service to others is the highest calling any person can answer. And the relationship that was nearly destroyed by secrets and misunderstanding has become a legacy of openness and communication that will continue to help families long after both Marcus and I are gone. In the end, the greatest battle I ever fought was not in the mountains of Afghanistan, but in the kitchen of a small apartment in Portland, where a father and son learned to see past their hurt and disappointment to find the love and respect that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.